on today's episode, we are speaking with a return guest, our very first return guest, Courtney Adair. So if you didn't see her the first time around, she's a professional West Coast swing dancer, judge, and instructor for over 15 years and involved in mental health and yoga as well. You'll hear more details about that as we get started in the episode. But today's focus really is talking about this concept of trauma-informed dance instruction. What does it mean, trauma-informed, if you're not familiar with that idea? How does it show up as an instructor in different settings, like if you're working with an individual versus a pair versus a group? Ways that you can utilize it to also help yourself as an individual, whether you're an instructor or not, and so many other elements that are incorporated in this umbrella of trauma-informed care, instruction, and practice. No matter who you are in the dance space, there are some really great bits of information in here and things where, again, I feel like we could have multiple additional episodes, multiple hours, digging even further into some of these different topics. So maybe some more ideas to come as well. But make sure that you check out this episode and you're going to walk away with some really great information to help you, whether you are a dancer or dance instructor. Welcome back to another episode of Dance Med Spotlight, where we talk about all things dance medicine and dance science. Today, we have our first returning guest, Courtney Adair. Welcome.
I'm the first returning guest. That's cool.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So for folks who were not around for our first chat, sharing a little bit about Courtney, and I'll let her share more about herself as well, but professional West Coast swing dancer, judge, and instructor for over 15 years, now with her master's completed, yay, in clinical mental health psychology, was with Naropa's contemplative psychotherapy and Buddhist psychology program, and trained in trauma-informed yoga. So lots of exciting different things that you get to blend together.
Yeah, absolutely.
Last time that we were together for a conversation, we were talking a lot more about things within the West Coast swing world and, how do we navigate competition weekends and how do we support dancers in some of those things. But today we have a little bit of a different focus, now talking about more of this trauma-informed approach to dance instruction. For folks who maybe aren't super familiar with the term trauma-informed instruction, what does that mean?
I think maybe one of the places we can start is a very simplified definition of trauma that I often reflect on and come back to, which is trauma is too much, too fast, too soon. And so with that idea of trauma, we can think about the amount of people and bodies in the world that have experienced too much, too fast, too soon at some point in their life. And so when I think about being trauma informed, whether that's as a therapist, as a judge, as a dance instructor, I want to have an awareness of the people that I am interacting with might have had some experience of trauma in their lives. And it is possible that that trauma is somehow showing up in the room. And one of the things I'm also aware of is as a person holding the container, leading the class, training a judge, interacting with a competitor, that I am usually someone who is in a position of power. So power is always in the room. But, I have a lot of opportunities where I get to be the one who is in an up power position. So in that sense, trauma-informed instruction is about me being aware of my own social locations, the power dynamics, and then being aware that often when it comes to dance, there's an opportunity to have a reparative experience.
Mhm.
So, can I have some awareness of what could be going on? Check in with myself, with the person I'm working with, and can we find some more safety that might be a way to repattern an experience they've had in their bodies before?
Mhm.
Yeah.
I like that, and I think, there's several different pieces there that make my brain go in a million different directions, but, just thinking about, when we're thinking about some of these other experiences that someone may have had, it could be something that seems relatively, quote unquote, "basic" or simple. It could be something that was really, like, life altering, some big event that happened. It could be in their dance life or in their non-dance life. We don't really know when, where, how, what,
Right.
but we know that it makes an impact in how they're doing things now and how they're moving forward.
Yeah, and we don't need to know,
Mhm,
because our bodies are playing it out for us, whether we're conscious of that or not.
mhm.
Yeah.
What are some of the ways that you maybe start to realize, like, maybe there's something going on that I need to be more attuned to with this individual that I'm working with?
Mhm. Hmm. So something I think about a lot, and this is how I approach healing, is that whatever is showing up is a safety mechanism. So whether that is someone who is really needs a lot of like feedback and approval, or someone who might like present as like defensive, or someone who becomes like really frozen or disassociated or leaves their body. These are all ways that like someone has kept themselves safe in the past.
Mhm,
And so those are some of the things that I see often are people becoming like immobilized in their body. You can think of that as like a shutdown.
mhm,
Maybe all of a sudden, like they lose affect and they just become like you can't really get a read on what's going on, and they can't either. And they're not able to like be and feel in their body.
mhm,
So yeah, that kind of like immobilization, shutdown, disassociation, and then also the love me, love me part can also show up of like tell me what's wrong, how do I fix it, is this okay, like those kinds of things are kind of signals for me of like, oh, maybe a trauma response is coming online, maybe this
mhm,
person's nervous system is a little bit dysregulated, and like can we slow down and check in here.
mhm. One of the things that you said there, I think s so many of those different, like, qualities or presentations that you might recognize are things that traditionally may have been seen as like, "Oh, this is somebody where, like, they're gonna be a challenge to teach or coach," or, "Oh, how do I," almost seen as like a, "Ugh, there's a problem coming up," versus approaching it from that place of sort of curiosity and compassion of, "How do I support this person when I see these things?" Versus just going, "Ugh, now what?"
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I love both of those words, curiosity and compassion. Yeah, especially when we're talking about dance and we're inviting people to like be in their bodies. That is the time like when it's available to meet someone with as much curiosity and compassion as possible. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And dance is one of those things too that is just it's so connected with identity, emotional regulation. How am I dealing with stress? Maybe it's a stress reliever for somebody, as
Mhm.
well as sometimes maybe a stress producer in some ways, if we're
Mhm.
in competition space or something like that, performance space. But just so many things where like it ties into so many different pieces of who we are, how we present in the world, and
Mhm.
that sort of thing. And so recognizing that from that perspective as well.
Yeah, and especially like when I think about the patterns that are coming up in relationship. So, right, because I get to work primarily with partner dancers doing
Mhm.
West Coast Swing. And so there's this whole other layer too of this is happening in connection, like this is happening in relationship to another body, to another person. And then you think about all the social locations and the different power dynamics that can be present there too. So like working with female identified followers. And really common themes are like, how do I take up space? Is it okay for me to move in this way? Am I getting it right? And so it's like, how do I, so I'm always like, how can I hold this specific question within the context of dance and like, here's this opportunity for a body to explore, like taking up space, like asking for what they need, setting a boundary. And a lot of like those
Mhm.
themes are what kind of inspired me to go back to school because I was seeing this, like, especially in private lessons, where I was like, wow, like we're really talking about something bigger here than just the dance.
Mhm. I know so many things that I've either heard or experienced as a follower too within West Coast Swing or partner dancing is, things like, I don't want my connection to feel too heavy for my follow. Or uh, one that you and I have talked about is like having too much power, like what to do with the power in the dance. Or, there's so many different pieces where, yeah, that totally can show up in other places or be related to other things as well. And it's fascinating to dig into.
Yes. Yeah, it is.
What are, let's see, how do I want to phrase this? Um, what are maybe some of the considerations that you have with this trauma informed approach to dance instruction when you're working with an individual versus a couple versus teaching like a group class? How
Mhm.
might those things differ a little bit?
Yeah, they differ a lot.
Mhm.
So
I'm
much.
sure.
And part of that is, like, how much I'm able to stay regulated in myself. Like, I am very much a one-on-one kind of person. I can do small groups, but, like, large groups kind of I'm like, "Ugh," I tend to, like, lose myself a little bit, just, like, socially. So, for me, it's easier to attune to someone when it's just, like, you and I talking. Like, I'm
Mhm.
able to stay in contact with myself, I can stay curious about you. When I'm working with a couple, like 2 people, maybe they're in a relationship or not, um, then it becomes 2 nervous systems I'm tracking in addition to hopefully being able to stay with mine. In a
Mhm.
large group format, oh my goodness.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah, like, how do I get a read on the room and, like, what is needed in the space and what happens when something, like, disrupts within that container and whew, yeah. So, so for me, it's that awareness too of like what I feel like I'm able to hold. And I will definitely like in larger group classes, if something comes up, I'm definitely like more, hey, let's address this later. Let's check in about this later. Just aware of like someone might be becoming dysregulated, and it's not gonna be helpful for them to be, like, viewed by, like, 50 different people as they're going through this response.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, versus, like, when I'm one-on-one and something comes up, often it feels a little bit more available, a little bit safer for us to address it in the moment.
Mhm. What are some of the things that you maybe use when you are in more of a group setting? Thinking about, a lot of dance instruction does happen in groups, whether it's a weekly class or, some of these workshops at competition weekends where there can be 100 plus people in the room.
Mhm.
How do you navigate when some of those things come up?
Mhm. Hmm. Something that I've gotten some positive feedback about recently is the amount of permission that I give folks.
Mhm.
in dance instruction. And I think that that can be really helpful for all the bodies in the room. So say a follower is like raises their hand, they're in a, 30-person workshop and they're like, "Hey, can I do this, and this?" And I say, "Yes, absolutely." You know, other people in the room are also hearing that like, "Yeah, like you're okay. Like absolutely. Like try this out." So I think about, these opportunities of like when an instructor receives a question from someone in the class of um one of my priorities is trying to give back agency to the person asking the question, right? I think that's really trauma informed. Instead of me coming in and saying, "I know your body, I know what you need to be doing. There's a right and there's a wrong way." I often
Mhm.
come back and I'm like, "How does that feel for you?" And they say, "It feels great." And I'm like, "Wonderful, keep doing it."
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So those are some of the things that I'm trying to be aware of in the larger group spaces.
Mhm. And I imagine that there's also an element, particularly in larger groups, not only how are you supporting the learners in the room, but then also how are you taking care of yourself? If you're whether it's something that comes up that's like, "Ooh, this I'm feeling this personally," or maybe coming into the space and not maybe feeling at sort of uh, best preparedness or best space yourself, but needing to show up for the people in the room.
Mhm,
What are some of the things that you do there from that kind of like self-preservation side as well?
mhm, yeah. Hmm. Yeah, this is something that I've been tracking recently. The universe is like, "Courtney, you've got a lesson to learn." I'm like, "Great. Looking forward to nailing it next time." But,
Mhm,
what I experience a lot is that power dynamic I was talking about. And, just because I'm the instructor doesn't mean that I have the most power in the room. So one of my identities is that I am a woman and I was raised and conditioned in a female body. And so what happens to me a lot in workshops is an older cis white man will talk over me, will offer me feedback on what I'm saying. That's a nice way to put it. Yeah, and so one of the ways that, like, I've been working with this is 2 parts. One is compassion. So, me noticing that my fawn response, so my trauma response is to, like, appease, fawn, that's how one of the ways I keep myself safe, is so, like, I notice that happening, and I'm like, "Well, okay, this is a safety mechanism. This isn't that I'm failing as an instructor or I'm not standing up for myself. I am doing what is available for me at the time."
mhm,
Okay. And then the second piece is what I'm working with is trying to shorten the hindsight gap. And so recognizing when something like that happens and then noticing how long it takes for me to like actually see what's going on. And then I've been doing a lot of journaling afterwards as a way of like rewinding the situation. So if I
mhm,
could have done this, if I could have responded in a way that I thought, yes, I nailed it. If I can journal about that afterwards, then it makes that hindsight gap a little bit shorter and I can reach for those tools or responses or skills a little bit quicker. Um,
mhm,
so it's just kind of like noticing the patterns that continue to happen and like how can I be more resourced, more grounded, create more safety in my system so that I can like respond to it and name impact sooner.
mhm. The 2 things that I really hear from that is just identification in the first place
Mhm.
and that reflection piece. And I definitely can that resonates a lot with me thinking about things that I've experienced in life and, I'm an anxious person and have dealt with things there and have had different experiences and when I can go, "Wait, this is a different thing right now. Some of these responses don't need to be kicking in or going,
Mhm.
maybe this is something I need to come back to later, or any of those kinds of things. And then also thinking about my role as a faculty member in a PT program, that reflection piece is huge. I always keep an open document on the computer as I'm teaching, and
Mm,
I'll take notes of like, even something as simple as, "That took quicker than I thought. I thought it was gonna take 15 minutes and it only took 10." Or, "Oh, that didn't work the way I was expecting it to. I need to come back and revisit this idea." And then intentionally going back and looking at those notes again. But that has been something I found really helpful, just to kinda track, how did things go? How did I respond? Or maybe a student situation comes up, and keeping notes of, how did I handle this? Is this maybe something I need to think of in my syllabus for next year
mhm.
to maybe prevent this from happening in the first place, or who knows what? But being able to write those things down and think about them later has been really helpful.
Yeah, and I think, that's a huge, like, trauma-informed piece right there, is, like, recognizing that when things are happening in the moment, we're not always able to, like, evaluate it,
Mhm.
right? So trauma can often, like, shoot us out of our bodies, put us into, like,
Mhm.
fight or flight. So and that's not the time to be, like, logical and moving slow and thinking about all the different things here. And so yeah, like I love that note system of like, let me revisit this later, like not in the middle of a lecture
Mhm.
or when I'm performing, or yeah, yeah, absolutely, for sure, like recognizing what our own bodies need, and that reflection afterwards can be so supportive for that.
Mhm. What are some other elements of trauma-informed dance instruction that you think would be helpful for folks to consider
Yeah,
as instructors themselves?
yeah. So some really like solid things are number one, time management. So being aware of like this lesson is 45 minutes long, and so I'm going to hold a 45-minute lesson. So even though it might feel like, ooh, this person has so much to learn, I'm feeling really generous, like I can keep going. If a body expects to be in a space for 45 minutes and I take that to an hour, um, I'm not holding the container. And so like time management is so important to me in terms of like
Mhm.
what people are expecting and then me meeting that expectation. Um, so I think that's a huge safety piece when possible. I also try to give a little bit of like a soft outline so that people kind of know what's going on. So for instance, like I did a workshop last weekend and we started with some like solo movement. And I said, hey, like we're gonna spend about 5 to 10 minutes on like warming up sides of body. Like we'll do some solo stuff, then we'll partner up and we'll see how that feels there, and then we'll do a little like combination. Um, so that people who are uncomfortable with solo movement in a West Coast swing class, they're not like, oh my God, I'm here for an hour doing solo movement, right? They can be like, hey, maybe I can try this out because I know it's only going to be like 5 to 10 minutes. This
Yeah.
isn't going to be an hour. So those kind of like setting the expectations for what their body can expect, so then people can choose whether they're in a place to step in or step out.
Mhm.
Yeah, those are a couple of big things.
I like both of those, thinking about the time management piece and respecting that container of time, especially in the classical dance world, ballet, tap, jazz, all that kind of stuff. One of the sort of running jokes of sorts is, when a dance teacher says one more time, it never seems that actually means one more time. It means like 10 more times. And
Mhm.
so it's like, now we know, once you're in the dance space for a while, that when you hear that, it doesn't actually mean that. But if you're new to some of the classes, but you said only one more time and we just did it 5 more times. And that preparedness piece too. So often in West Coast swing workshops in particular, a lot of times there's no title of a workshop. Maybe it's a leveled workshop, or you just know who's teaching and that's it. And it's not until you walk into the space that you even know, what is it that we're going to be learning,
Mhm.
much less how are we going to be working on any of those things. So giving that little overview at the beginning can be really helpful for the person who's just walking in and going, okay, here I am, teach me.
Right. Yeah, yeah. And, um, I also think a lot about the material that I'm offering. And like I started West Coast Swing as a junior in the community. I was 14.
Mhm.
And I think about some of the workshops I took and the kind of handholds, the kind of like body contact that was being taught. And I'm just like rotating to partner as a 14-year-old, being subjected to some things that like, yeah. So I think about that a lot, like when I'm crafting workshop material, and like even
Mhm.
things like some arm transitions and some hand holds, like those can be really, really activating for people who have experienced like physical trauma. And so I'm like, nope, X-nay on the hammerlock, yay. Like we are not, no, we're
Mhm.
not going to be going through this, especially like if I am teaching a workshop at a dance event where I can't go through and make sure that like everyone is working on this move safely. Like I have to assume that some people are not going to be able to execute it. And so I'm not going to put that kind of material into a room where I can't be tracking everyone's experience.
Mhm.
So awareness there.
That is so important. Sort of knowing your audience that you're working with and putting some thought into that.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, and even what you were saying of some of the experiences you had as a junior in the community. I know I was at a competition years ago where on the dance floor I got paired with a junior, which was fine. I dance with whomever and it's great. But the song choice that was playing with juniors in the competition, it
Mhm.
was some of the most inappropriate music, and even inappropriate probably for just the average person, but especially considering that there were juniors in that division. And it
Mhm.
was just like, oh, maybe we could have planned ahead, or had some backup plans, or navigated this a little bit differently if we had identified that there were juniors in the space.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. As a head judge, I am yeah, as a head judge, that's one of the things that's really, really important to me, is like tracking when a junior is in a contest. Well, just in general, I think like we don't need to be having overtly sexual songs, regardless of age. That can just, it's just not necessary.
Hmm.
Yeah, like especially when there's not choice, right? And that comes back to the trauma informed piece. Is like it's very different to play a sexually explicit song late night where we're like having a little bit more like choice of who we're dancing with. But when you're in a competition, like it feels like so much choice is being removed, right? I don't get to pick my partner. I don't get to pick where I'm dancing on the floor, or like, yeah, what song. And so like really just having a lot more thoughtfulness of how can we support bodies in the room.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And thinking of that element of choice also when we're in the competition space. So for people, I guess first, for people not familiar with West Coast Swing and what competition is like, do you want to get a little description of what that typically looks like at some of these events?
Yeah. So I think one of the competitions that West Coast Swing is most well known for is Jack and Jill. So you enter a prelim and you are paired usually with three different partners, and you get to dance to three different songs in total. And so there's a lot of randomization with who am I dancing with and what kind of song are we getting. And then from there, there might be several progressive rounds that go like that. And then in a final Jack and Jill, you are randomly paired with someone and you randomly get a song. And you might be dancing just as a spotlight, just you and your partner on the floor. That might be like 14 other couples. Um, but yeah, that's kind of the breakdown of Jack and Jill, I think. I think I
Mhm.
described that, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that was a good overview. So thinking about this, random music, random song, you're on the floor, there are people there as judges, there's the audience, there's a lot going on. It's also competition space, so we're in competition mode and whatever comes with that for us. What suggestions, I guess, might you have for somebody who's coming into that space and then they're having something come up for them when they don't have choice? Something, whether it's a song that is triggering for them, a partner where it's like, ooh, this is not a good fit, but I don't have a choice in the moment. What are some things that people can do to try to help themselves in that moment?
Yeah. You know, I think what's great is that this is a larger conversation that's going on in the community right now, and, like, I get to have this conversation a lot with Riley and their safety and swing safety reports and restorations, there we go, um,
Mhm.
program that is happening at a lot of events, and it's something that I've had lots of conversations with lots of different people recently of like, what can we do to support people when there is this feeling of like, I don't have choice. And so I think I'll go a little bit more towards like the nervous system regulation side of
Mhm.
things. But one of those things is to find as much resourcing and like agency in your body as possible. And sometimes that can look like not finishing the dance, um,
Mhm.
which is absolutely okay. And sometimes that can look like uh, allowing yourself to disassociate, and that's okay too. Um, Again, just like noticing how you might be responding and like honoring that that's a safety mechanism in your body. Um, yeah, so like allowing letting yourself not have a first place dance is okay, like, oh,
Mhm.
okay, this song makes me like really activated, or wow, all of a sudden I'm not aware of my body. I'm just going to let myself like do my basics, and I am not going to expect myself to like do all the things that I've been working on in training. Like, I'm just going to get through it, and like that's okay too, you know.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, like some basic things you can do if you feel like, you know what, actually there might be safety here, but I'm just being activated for whatever reason. It's like, can I do a quick scan of the room? So looking at the exits, the floor and the ceiling as a reminder of like, oh, actually my body is safe right now. I'm not like in a jungle getting hunted down by a tiger, which is how our nervous system
Mhm.
wants us to act. Some things like that, like feeling feet on the floor. Can I take a big breath? Those kinds of things can also help if it's, that navigating of like, am I experiencing anxiety? Like, does my body need like is this signal that my body is sending does it need to be here right now, kind of what you were talking about
Mhm.
earlier, or can I try to like regulate some of this adrenaline, because it's just actually excitement, not anxiety, and yeah.
I love that, and I think I so many of those things are just, I mean, even if you it's just nerves going into competition. Those are great strategies to have and to have opportunities to practice at other times, so
Mhm.
then you're familiar with using those tools and you're not just trying to figure this out for the first time when you're stepping onto the dance floor about to compete.
Yeah, yeah. A lot of people in private lessons, they're like, "Why doesn't my competitive dancing feel like my social dancing?" And I'm like, "Well, for very good reason." Because the conditions and the context are totally different. And when we're social dancing, we've done a lot of things to prepare our bodies so that we can feel safe. And then when we feel safe, we can be creative. Um,
Mhm.
but when all the lights are on, people are holding clipboards, you'll get a yes, no, or a maybe. Your partner's also nervous, like all these different things, like adrenaline is running. Like, of course, like my creativity isn't going to be as quickly available as it is at 2 in the morning with the lights down low, and I'm dancing with my best friend in the corner of the ballroom.
Mhm.
So it's like honoring that, like, hey, your body is just really, really smart, and it's actually responding to heightened conditions, which are different than social dancing. So are there ways that you can work to make your competition dances feel more settled and grounded and fluid like you do socially? Absolutely. But there's nothing wrong with you if you're not having the same experience.
Mhm. And one thing that you mentioned there too, if your partner is nervous, I have definitely, like, I'm someone who is very aware of the people around me
Yeah.
and how they're feeling and interacting in the world and that sort of thing. And so, when I have that partner where I can tell they're just having a moment, it's, even while connected with them and I'm deep breathing myself and, kind of inviting them into that space of like, join me in deep breathing without actually saying anything, or, just trying to do things to kind of help them
Mhm.
regulate and be in a better space. It has also been an interesting experience as I've become more aware of that.
Yeah, and I think that's really important for dance instruction too, is like this idea of, um, you were talking about like, what do you do when you're like completely, like depleted, but you have to show up anyways? It's like sometimes just showing up with a regulated nervous system myself is more than enough.
Mhm.
So it's like, because people can get really nervous during dance instruction, right? Like, especially actually like one-on-one, like private lessons can be really scary sometimes. And so, like, just me staying grounded in my body, talking a little bit slower, breathing lower into my pelvis, like, then I'm creating this opportunity for us to co-regulate. Like, I think of like, hey, you can borrow my nervous system for a little bit. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, exactly. So that experience you have of noticing when a partner might be super amped going towards nervousness. Yeah, like how can you invite the partnership to be more grounded because you're just staying regulated in yourself? Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm. It makes me think back years ago when I was working at a hospital. They had all of the staff go through training with this program, Heart Math, where it is kind of learning how to regulate yourself and knowing that, as we're going into a room as a provider, especially in a hospital setting, we
Mhm.
know that the person in that hospital bed is probably not at the best point in life right now. Otherwise, they wouldn't be in a hospital bed.
Right.
Something's going on. And
Right.
if we're also coming in carrying stuff with us, we might not have the most productive, effective, supportive session versus if we're able to figure out how to kind of check in with ourselves, regulate ourselves, sort of leave some of that at the door to pick up and deal with later. But learning some of those different tricks and going through that training was a really amazing thing that I wish more of my colleagues had loved as much as I feel like I did.
Yeah.
But I feel like it was a lot of really great tools that have served a purpose in a lot of other places since then too.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I love tools like that for, recognizing when you're like, oh, like I might not be able to reflect on something right now. Like this might need to happen later. So, like, how can I just regulate myself in the moment so I can come back and revisit that at another time?
Mhm.
Absolutely.
One of the other things that it makes me think of also is sometimes, maybe you go in as the instructor, as the judge, as, whatever role it is, and you feel like you're in a well-regulated place, you're coming in a good position, and then you're working with somebody where they're sort of, they're not in a good place. They're um sometimes I've heard the term like an energy or emotional vampire, where it feels
Mhm.
like it's just like pulling everything out of you interacting with them. What are some of the things that you do when you're in that sort of dynamic with somebody?
Hmm. So I think this is also trauma informed, and this comes back to like agency and power is as a therapist, as a yoga instructor, as a friend, as a dance teacher, like I can't heal anyone.
Mhm.
Like people cannot be healed, they can only heal themselves. So I I can't fix anyone. Furthermore, there's nothing to fix.
Mhm.
And so kind of recognizing that like allows me to meet someone with like compassion and curiosity in the moment, right? Because sometimes like when you're working with the energy of like tell me you love me, like tell me everything's okay, right? Like what actually needs to happen is they need to be redirected towards like I'm okay, And so if I'm coming in and being like, yes, 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 of course, you're great, you're great, you're great, like that's going to be exhausting for me. And behind that is the energy of, I can fix you, I can fix you. Right. And so it's like, so it softens it a little bit for me as the instructor of like, hey, I can show up and like meet you with love, but I don't need to like give you more than actually just meeting you, like, and just allowing you to maybe give it back to yourself. So
Mhm.
that for me is an energy saver. Yeah, it's like
Mhm.
calming down a little bit and recognizing that like people are their own healers. So how can I just show up and hold the space for them to do the work themselves?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like, especially in this dance that is a partnered dance,
Mm.
there's so much of that where it's like, like you were saying earlier, where it's not just you in the room, it's not just you and maybe a single student,
Mhm.
but having kind of the trifecta of different personalities and different nervous system regulation levels and all of that kind of thing. Um, there's a lot that can sort of like feed off of one another and influence one another and all of that. And so just being aware of that and having some little tools in the tool belt and awareness, I think, is just the big part.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Mhm.
What are some other elements when we're thinking about trauma-informed dance instruction that
Mhm.
maybe we haven't hit on that you think would be important for folks to be aware of?
Ask permission before you touch someone's body. Hello. Like, it seems so obvious, and I feel like in dance culture, it is it is not I don't see it happen very often. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Wow. Like, hey, like, we're working on hip stretch or like something with frame, I will be like, "Hey, is it okay for me to like touch your shoulder right
Mhm.
now?" Um, yeah. Yeah, that's a big one.
Mhm.
Or, like, dance instructors being like, "Hey, like, are you comfortable, like, if you put your hand here on me, I want you to feel something in my own body," of, like, inviting that instead of just being like, "Put your hands here." Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
big
Yeah. One of the things that we actually utilize with our instruction in the PT program is also permission for feedback.
one. Mhm,
Where, say we do an assessment with a student, and even though we are in this space of like, we know that this is a test, an assessment, and the whole point is to get feedback and know how you did, there's also that element of, okay, now we're actually going to talk about it. Is it okay for me to give you feedback? And
mhm,
having them actually say yes gives that permission for us then to provide the feedback, but also allows them the space to say no if they don't feel like they're in the place to receive that feedback or listen to that feedback. And
mhm,
it's rare that we have a student use the no, but they know that they are able to if they need to.
mhm. Yeah, yeah, and, like, recognizing like, for me, another part of, like, trauma-informed care and instruction is that if someone is having a trauma response or they're dysregulated, they might not be able to tell you no. And so
Mhm.
it's like, "Hey, like, I'm not gonna be perfect at this, like, I can't know what every single person, their entire trauma history. I don't even know my own, oh my goodness."
Mhm.
Right? But it's like, how can I have more awareness, of the potential? And yeah, yeah. So I think it's also that's like that knowing that like we can't get it right and
Mhm.
or 100% right all the time. And that like dysregulation or being triggered or activated isn't a bad thing. Right? Like, it's
Mhm.
something that happens, and having, like, a really flexible nervous system of, like, I can move out of my window of tolerance, notice it, and I can bring myself back into regulation. That's actually a wonderful sign of, like, how do I deal and cope with, like, life and being in a body? And so, yeah, so I think that's another important piece is sometimes, like I know for me when I was first diving into trauma-informed yoga, I became so nervous of, like, hurting someone or triggering them, that it was like, like I became frozen as well. And so,
Mhm.
yeah, so it's kind of that softening of like having awareness and like doing what you can. Um, I think is also really important when people are starting to think about how they're showing up as instructors. Is yeah, just being gentle with yourself in the process.
Mhm. Having the self-compassion with it.
Oh yeah.
I recently was talking with somebody for another interview, a dietitian, and we were talking about, she has a book out talking about nutrition and nourishing the dancer's body. And there are multiple things in there where she's kind of talking about things that we've seen in the dance community and approaches, language that maybe weren't great and supportive, and where we're trying to go with some of it. And there's some different things to kind of like help guide the thought process through that and work through it. And so often she has pieces in there where it's like, if you're reading this right now and you're going, oh no, this is what I've been doing my whole career working with all of these dancers, you don't need to feel guilty about it. You don't need to be harsh on yourself. You can recognize that that's where you've been and that you're trying to work on it so that maybe you're not continuing that pattern. And it's, just having those little reminders of it's okay and you're working on it.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. For sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Anything else that you want to share with folks about this idea of trauma-informed instruction?
I think invitational language was one of the foundational pieces because I first started learning about trauma informed through my yoga training. And that made a really big difference for me. This idea of like, I'm not telling someone's body what to do because they know their body way better than I'm ever going to, but I can invite them to like explore things and to try it on for themselves and see if they like it or not.
Mhm,
So yeah, yeah. Like, so this idea of in dance, like everything's an experiment. Like we can stay curious with our own movement,
mhm.
right? And so that's one of the ways that I like try to balance that power dynamic in the room too, right? Is because people can come in and be like, "You're the instructor, you tell me what to do. You know best." Right? And so it's like, so I'm curious, like, try out this foot position or engaging this muscle or how does this shape feel? And then inviting that feedback of like, because this is what feels good in my body. But my body's really like has different experiences than yours. So, like, how's it feeling for you? It doesn't feel good? Great. Let's ditch it. That's not the way. Okay, let's try something else. So that kind of like invitational language, I think is really, really important.
And I think that helps also with, approaching it from this, like, guiding the process versus dictating the process, I
Mhm.
think also makes it so much easier to actually integrate some of the things that you're working on. And, if you're told that this is the way this must happen and it feels terrible in your body, what are the odds that one, you're going to want to continue doing that
Yeah.
and that it's actually going to show up when you need it in like a competition or in a performance and that sort of thing because it feels bad.
Mhm.
So why incorporate that?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, like, that's like, if I think about what being trauma informed has helped me to understand on a deeper level, it's that, like, I want to prioritize feeling good in my body.
Mhm.
Yeah, which is not always such an obvious thing. Um, yeah, that like that's actually what I want to be moving towards, and that's what I want to be inviting, everyone that I interact with, that they can also move towards feeling good in their body. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, especially like in dance. I think sometimes we were like, this has to hurt in order for it to be good.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and I get really curious about that, and, because for me, like, as a judge, um, my favorite dances are the ones where it's like I'm witnessing flow state, like, I'm witnessing someone feeling really good in their body,
Mhm.
and so just yeah, yeah, just like, can I have the agency and the permission to say no to what doesn't feel good and say yes to what does. And I think that that is, on a deep level, also repatterning trauma experiences.
That's such an important idea. And thinking of, and again, brain going in like 10 different places with this, but one is particularly working with young ballet dancers, for example. It requires a lot of range of motion. And if we're doing things like dancing on point in these shoes back here,
Mhm.
they are not the comfiest thing in the world, for sure. And it is so much a part of the culture for years, for hundreds of years, that to do this dance style, pain is involved, and that's just normal, and we just accept it and move on. And it's gotten us to a point where we now know that dancers have a different pain threshold and tolerance. We know that they are more likely to push through injury before they get to a point where they say, I need to stop and do something about this, because there's this idea of dance equals pain.
Yeah.
This is what we expect. So when you're saying that, I think that is so important to hear and acknowledge and think about, how maybe we can continue to change that idea a bit.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Dancers have a higher pain threshold. Woo!
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
could be like a whole nother
I
5 hours.
know. Wow, speaking of trauma. Yeah. Yeah. Wowza.
Hmm.
Mm.
Hmm. And one of the things too is, if we're taking this approach, being trauma informed in instruction and practice and all of these different things, it also doesn't mean that we are sacrificing something for it. Where it's like, if we have expectations for a dance style, where it's like, but we can find a way to still make you successful within this style and feel good doing it, and not say, well, if you can't get your leg in this position, you're just not going to make it.
Yeah. 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 I think there's also a piece in there about like every individual like having the right to feel really good in their body. I think is a part of that, like going from trauma informed being a system of you can't say that, you can't do that. And it starts to move towards like um a bigger worldview of like, don't all humans deserve to be loved and experience safety in their bodies? And yeah, yeah, I love when I get to work with someone where I just get to meet them and be like, yes, that's okay. Like, yes, I want to see you. Like, no, you don't have to be like someone else. Like, actually, I think this part of you is really, really cool. Like, why are you hiding it? Like, I just, that's the stuff that gets me so excited of like witnessing
Mhm.
people being like, oh, like I can just be in my body. Like, I can just feel good. And then, yeah, yeah, it's a very rewarding part of the trauma informed journey.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's having those little light bulbs, or, moments of finding power for themselves, and that sort of thing is so cool.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's that like emotionally corrective experience, right? So like where someone was before met in a way that it wasn't safe for them to be in their body. They're now having this experience of like, oh, my body's learning that it is okay. And that's one of the ways that you can kind of process the frozenness of trauma and how it does stay in the body.
Mhm.
That's one of the ways to kind of let things um, rewire together in a new way.
Mhm.
Yeah.
One of the things that I know I've definitely appreciated when I've done private lessons with you is, for me, some of the ways that I process through things, especially in dance, is talking out loud, feeling where it is in my body, thinking about like, where did this habit even come from in the first place? And like, talking through all of that thought process through it. And so often I have been in lessons, whether it's West Coast swing or something else, where I go through that process for myself that makes sense to me, and am met with, almost like a defensive, like you're coming up with excuses why, it's not a very like accepting atmosphere of the way that I process through learning these things and identifying things for myself. But when I'm working with you, it's like, yeah, let's talk about it, or just acknowledging that that is my process, or kind of joining me in the process a little bit, or different things like that, and having somebody who is able to connect with that and not just automatically turn into, you're just coming up with excuses of why you can't do this. It makes it so much more open continuing through the rest of the lesson too, and much more productive, rather than thinking I can't use my process because it's being perceived not the way that I mean it.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes me sad to hear that you've had that experience. Yeah. Yeah. Because
Mhm.
I so like for me as an instructor, and like when I've gotten to like work with you, I love getting to be witness to that process, because I feel like it also really helps me as an instructor. Like I gain a deeper understanding of how your body wants to move and what might have been like hindering it before. And so like I feel like it helps me as an instructor when you let me in to that process. So yeah.
Mhm. And I see that, even in what I do as a physical therapist, when I have a patient or client that I'm working with, if they feel like they shouldn't or can't share other experiences, other injuries, other whatever with me, sometimes we get to a point where we're working on something, and then they do feel like they're at a point where they're ready to share that. And it's
Mhm.
like, oh, now that changes my perspective. And like, what might this also be linked to? What other things do I need to consider? What else might be going on? And so, yeah, I feel like it does make such a difference in how we continue forward together when I am able to learn some of those other pieces, and they do feel comfortable enough to share things with me.
Mhm. And I think that's like maybe one more thing I'll say in terms of like trauma informed practices. And you brought it up of like creating that opportunity for dialogue and feedback. And I think what's important to ask and to feel into is like, how does your student process and receive information? Because that's another place where as an instructor I might be really excited and stoked on a topic, and now I'm doing too much too fast too soon, right? And so
Mhm.
I'm just like, repeating some things that have been harmful. So yeah, of like I will often check in like throughout a lesson, and I'll give options. So instead of just being like, what do you want to do next? Because I can be like,
Mhm.
what? You're the teacher. You tell my body what to do next. Be
Yeah.
like, hey, what sounds good? We can dance this to music. I can count you through it. We can move to a different topic. So like giving people some opportunities to like choose what works best for them. And yeah, like how often can I check in to see how
Mhm.
they're doing and how are they processing in real time? Because everyone is so different with like how, yeah, how they need to move through like a 45-minute lesson. Yeah.
Mhm. One of my favorite things to do, especially with the kids that I work with, um, because so often as kids, and being in some of the dance spaces where, so much is sort of told to them, and like, this is your schedule, this is where you need to be, this is how you need to do things, everything is figured out for them. Giving them options of like, okay, there are 2 or 3 ways that we can work on this thing that we need to work on. We're gonna try each of them, and then I want your opinion. Tell me which one you like better, which one feels better,
Yeah.
which one is more fun that you're more likely to do at home when you're away from here,
Yeah.
versus some really, what feels like a boring exercise to you. And they just love that when they get to make some decisions in the process, and it's not just another person telling them, "Here's what you need to do and when you need to do it," and all of that sort of thing.
Yeah, I love that. Like, especially with kiddos, like, how can I say, you know your body best? And then how can I provide, you're providing experiences for them to get to like, yeah, be really empowered and have that agency. Heck yeah, that's awesome.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's fun exploring into all of this stuff for sure.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
So at this point, I think is a good opportunity for our special segment, the final bow. In every episode, we have the final bow, essentially the take home message. So, with all of the different things that we've talked about in today's episode, what is one, maybe two things that you feel like you want someone to walk away with?
We branched in so many different
Right?
ways. Yeah. Um, One thing that's sticking out to me is, like, moving towards feeling good in your body. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. Yeah, and then I think a couple of the words that I've repeated a lot, are, like, agency and empowerment, and I think, like, that's one of the quote, unquote, like, "goals" of being trauma informed is prioritizing that your student has agency and is feeling empowered in their own body. Yeah, those are a couple of my
Yeah. I
ways.
Then, last and certainly not least, the shameless plug. So, your opportunity to promote anything that you have going on, let the people know what you have. The floor is yours.
Yeah. Um, there are lots of great ways to work with me now. Yeah, yeah. So since I graduated and started my private practice, I am offering uh, therapy, individual and couples. And then I'm also working with dancers in a consultation format. And then I'm also offering coaching. So yeah, check out my website and feel free to drop me a line and see if, yeah, there's some of the things that we can work on together.
Yes, and I highly recommend for folks who are listening to this. So, make sure to check out all of the information that we've got shared with you. Thanks so much, Courtney, for your time today.
Yeah, thank you for having me again.
Yeah. Woohoo. Dance Med Spotlight is hosted and produced by Alyssa Arms. We discuss all things dance medicine. This has been another episode from Dance Med Spotlight. The Dance Med Spotlight is intended for educational purposes only. No clinical decision making should be based solely on one source. While care is taken to ensure accuracy, factual errors can be present.